Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. It's John Clark. I'm a licensed therapist, group practice owner, and business coach at privatepracticeworkshop.com. I'm excited to introduce my guest today. It's Nicole Lewis-Keeber. She's the business therapist, the author of How to Love Your Business, and the creator of the Do No Harm program for trauma conscious entrepreneurs. She's passionate about the impact of small T trauma on businesses and combines therapeutic process with business coaching to help entrepreneurs build emotionally sustainable, financially stable businesses. Nicole, thanks so much for being here. What else should people know, just kind of jumping off of that bio as to who you are and how you got here?
Yeah, they should know that when I use the moniker business therapist, that I actually am a therapist, have been a therapist.
That's good to know.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people using that terminology around, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, I have a master's degree in social work, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm licensed in the state of Pennsylvania. And for 18 years, I was in a clinical capacity as a therapist or clinical supervisor, a lot of different arenas in my history. um, Before I began to transition to doing some coaching with small business owners and entrepreneurs, because I wanted to support people in a little bit of a different way. And I've worked with everyone since then, people who own group practices, massage therapists, interior designers, you name it, I've worked with them. And it's been a really interesting journey to actually transition from doing direct practice to still,
yeah,
using this therapist hat in this new world.
yeah. And so, how did you get interested in this idea of trauma uh, in the context of how it affects our businesses and ourselves as business owners?
It was an evolution, and it's one of those things where it's
Mm,
kind of you're at the right place for that awareness.
yeah,
I started out doing money mindset coaching with small business owners, and I think a lot of them were attracted to working with me because I had been a therapist, and we really did a lot of work on how about money trauma, basically about how trauma was impacting their money, the way that they valued themselves, and
mm,
how it was impacting their bottom line. And I began to see that it wasn't, they didn't have a mindset issue when it came around money. They were actually struggling with a trauma response, or the impact of childhood trauma on how they were setting up their relationship with their money. And
yeah,
furthermore, it began to, just really evolve into understanding not just that, how childhood trauma actually impacts many aspects of how people run their businesses. And I saw this with my clients and with myself as well when I
yeah.
started my own business. And it's just been an evolution since then.
What would be an example of that? Or you mentioned money trauma, which are not necessarily two words I've heard put together. But what would be an example of that, or maybe a way that it tends to show up for therapists in private practice?
Yeah, I think undercharging. I think that money trauma, kind of the definition of that is some experience that you had, in those, formative years where information about money, your safety, your security, kind of got downloaded. Could have been that you saw a parent struggle, you were, dealing with financial insecurity, but you internalize some
Yeah,
thoughts or beliefs about money, and how that can play out for us, as um, business owners or therapists, is deferring wealth, deferring the ability to bring in more revenue, like
yeah,
underpricing, those type of things, is how the money trauma can show up.
yeah. It's I mean, the word worth comes to mind, right? And there's a lot of us who have underlying beliefs and faulty beliefs around, if I charge more and make more, I'm a burden, or I'm unlovable, or I'm greedy, or whatever it is. It triggers something automatic there that tends to stop us from doing the thing that would better serve our lives and our businesses or our
Mhm.
families, whatever it might be. Um, and sometimes it's just a matter of making that belief explicit, which I think is personally what I believe is a lot of what therapy is about. It's about questioning underlying assumptions and then looking at that and saying, okay, the
Mhm.
belief is, if I charge X, then I'm a bad person, or I'm
Mhm.
greedy, or I'm money hungry, or I can't charge X because I'm not worth that much, whatever it might be. So making that explicit, and then, um, looking at the validity of that belief and how it's serving you or how
Yeah.
relevant it is to today. So,
Yeah, and you see so many people in the money mindset industry who will say, "Oh, you need to charge what you're worth." When you've had challenges against your worth in your life, that's not going to be meaningful to someone. You have to help them understand what number actually feels icky and what number feels good, and start to do some work on expanding your tolerance for charging
mhm.
that thing. Because you can't charge what you're worth. You're priceless, right? That's not a good measurement of what your worth is. And particularly if you're in the healing industry, like we have been, people have a lot of very strong opinions about what you're allowed to make in that industry as
Oh,
well.
big time.
Mhm.
That's the we have an incredible way of holding one another down and devaluing one another and shaming the therapist
Mhm.
who's charging more
Been
than
there.
the next therapist. And I'm befuddled by that even years into doing this work and being a therapist, helping therapists. We're still pretty good at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So what's the work um like for this type of thing? I mean, if there's kind of money trauma, for instance, issues around worth that are tied to trauma, is it that the therapist needs to go and get that trauma resolved, through good trauma therapy and that will help their business? Or how do you, make sense of it all? And how do you actually help, business owners?
Yeah. So I think that it's a couple of things. It's going to be yes and in that I think that a lot of therapists, first of all, you have to look at the origination of our desire to be a therapist. And I whether you're a therapist or someone who starts a music company, like I work with all kinds of people, but there's an origin story about your desire to start a business or to be entrepreneurial, and a lot of times that origin story is connected to some kind of childhood experience that we had that could have been traumatic. And in that moment, either consciously or unconsciously, we said, I never want to feel this way again, so I'm going to,
Yeah.
or I want to prove this person wrong, so I'm going to go do this thing, or I always want to be the person in control, so
Yeah.
that I feel safer and secure. And so, truck on down the line a little bit, and that can be I'm going to start my own business, or I'm going to be entrepreneurial and always be the one in control, or I'm very interested in therapy, what it means, why people make the decisions they do
Yeah.
about all the things. So
Yeah.
we have to look at the origin story of if therapists is our connection to becoming a therapist rooted in some kind of trauma that we have, right?
Yeah, often is the
First and
case,
foremost,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. I
I
was
know very
the
few
mediator
therapists who are
and
like, I'm going to be a
mm,
therapist and start a practice, and everything was hunky dory for me, right? There's
yeah.
some motivation. And so, what I have seen is that trauma can often be the motivation to become a therapist. It can also be the motivation to be the one who owns the practice or a group practice or even just your own private practice.
Mm,
And so we have to look at what is our motivation and get what I call your deeper why. Get a real clear understanding of what your deeper why is. What is the emotional need that you have here that you're trying to meet? Because what we do often is we put business solutions on emotional challenges. And when we do that and don't recognize
mhm.
it, we don't get the relief that we're looking for.
Well, the challenge is differentiating between, is this, meeting a healthy need of mine, or is it, rooted in trauma or in, never feeling like I'm good enough, or the
Mhm.
therapist that's a martyr and, sees 40 clients a week and feels like, I can't not do this or whatever it is. So I guess my question is, how do you help therapists know if their why is, healthy or not?
Yeah. So we kind of go through a process of I believe that when you start a business of any kind, that you enter into a relationship with it. And so I take them through some processes of determining what type of relationship they have with their current business, their current practice. If the relationship feels demanding and demeaning, if it feels like it's out of their control or that they can never please this business, or they're feeling like they're almost being a victim of this business,
Right.
then we're able to kind of take a peek at, okay, so this is your business, and so what was the catalyst for setting it up to make it be pretty much a perpetrator of
Yeah.
abuse towards you, right? We set up those patterns again. And so we do some exercises to figure out what is the relationship you have now, what is the one that you'd like to have, and where have you felt this way before? What
Yeah.
relationship in your past have you experienced? And I had to do this with myself because I recognized that my own business, I had set it up to replicate a role dynamic that I had with my mother, who was, had a very challenging
Yeah.
relationship growing with. So in my own business, I felt like I could never do anything right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you kind of have to take a look at what are some of the um, relationship dynamics that are coming up for you in this thing that you have created, that you have
Yeah.
put your time and effort into.
So interesting. And I've, I meet a lot of therapists, and one in particular, I'm thinking about a client of mine, and he started his business in a crisis by necessity, right? There was a major loss of income, big shift in the family, right? A divorce happens, and then he kind of entered into private practice in that crisis, right? Where it was like, if I don't grow this darn thing, really bad things are going to happen, or more bad things are going to happen, and so and what's interesting is years later, when he's then now doing great, has a solid business, is making a fantastic income, meaning the income that he wants to make, and is doing really well in that regard, seeing the type of clients he wants to see. All those things are like they're working, but internally he's still operating and feeling like he's in that crisis, right? And he
Mhm.
has to do more and waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that's a trauma response, right? And
Absolutely.
it goes against the facts, and even showing him like his numbers, his profit and loss statement, all that. It still feels like, but what if, right? So, I mean, how would you kind of work with a client like that, or even we have this topic of the four signs that unchecked trauma is running your
Mhm.
business. I don't know if any of those pop out to you there, or what else you would look at.
Yeah, exactly. It actually does. Yeah, some of the signs are, this person set up this business out of an emergent response, like crisis oriented, and their nervous system or their, you know,
Yeah.
mindset never caught up to the fact that, we're not in crisis anymore, and so we're going to continue to operate our business from this crisis standpoint. We're not going to celebrate wins. We're not going to, assess where we're at realistically and kind of let it sink in that we're no longer in crisis, that we can actually be in growth mode at this point,
Yeah.
right? So that would probably be an example of feeling like, it's running you instead of you running it,
Yeah.
because they haven't put any what I call like that emotional sustainability plan. Like, what is it that you need emotionally from this business to feel sustainable so that you can continue to work towards the financial stability that you want and not feel like that, the business is running you. So that's part of it. And also striving but never arriving, right? It's using this place of I'm going to continue to run with my hair on
Hmm.
fire. And I don't recognize that it's out. It's been put out for a
Yeah.
long time, from now. But I've never
Yeah.
arrived to the point where I feel safe, secure. My goals have been met, and I can actually grow a new goal for myself that
Yeah.
feels, you know, satisfying as opposed to being just literally a trauma response at that
Right.
point. Yeah.
Right. It's so interesting. I see a lot of therapists kind of delaying their gratification, right? Or delaying feeling good about their business. Or it might be as tangible as not paying yourself, right? I met a
Hmm.
therapist, well, I'm working with one right now who, after, a year and a half of working really, really hard, she hasn't paid herself. And it's just that fear of, what if something goes wrong, or have I earned it or deserve it, or even just not knowing, like practically having that permission to pay yourself, and setting up, a healthy, kind of bookkeeping process for yourself of how you kind
Hmm.
of, get paid. And I talk a lot about treating yourself like as if you're your best employee. And I asked her, I said, would you hire an employee who's been seeing 25 people a week for a year and a half and not pay them? How abusive is that? Right.
Love that. Yeah.
And she emailed me this morning and she said, good news. I paid myself for the first time and it felt amazing. Like incredible, incredible. And,
Yeah.
she just needed that permission, or she needed someone from the outside to go, wow, that's really abusive. And, you have my permission now to pay
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. It's so easy to set up a codependent or an abusive dynamic with our business. And that's a perfect example of it. And in my book, How to Love Your Business, I tell a story about, me giving a talk about you are you're your own boss, right? You're the most important employee in the room. You matter, you're important. And um, and I was talking about how, a lot of the people that I've talked to or worked with are literally running their businesses from the corner of, a kitchen table with no boundaries, no space around them. And this one woman stood up and she said, "You've called me out. I'm literally working in a broken chair in my kids' playroom while and I keep moving my laptop around as they come in." And I said, "So if you had an employer who gave you a broken chair and no
Yeah.
place to do your work, what would you do?" She goes, "I'd call OSHA." And I'm like, "Exactly."
So
So why are
funny.
we doing this
Yeah.
to ourselves? We need to take a look at why you're
Yeah.
doing this to yourself.
Yeah, it's like even like taking up space, kind of thing. Again, goes back to worth in my opinion. And yeah, I had a client recently who, after many many years, had delayed this buying himself the therapist chair that he wanted. Right, and again, all factual information said you can afford it. You should buy this chair, right? But that emotional piece still hadn't caught up. And sometimes I think it's really important to do that that piece, right? That tangible piece to get that emotional reward. I've certainly that's been the case for me at different times or just different milestones I had. Even with this podcast, I worked after working really hard on it and getting it to a certain point. I said, I'm going to buy my dream microphone, which is this one I'm using. Meaningless to most people. It's just a black microphone, but it was a feeling of having put in so much. And I'm staring at my old microphone right now, which is a $50 one.
Mhm,
Of I've worked really hard, and a lot of people don't see that, and I want to have that reward both literally and just kind of emotionally.
mhm,
Um, and there's something to it. But as therapists, again, we're really bad at it. It doesn't come naturally to me. It's awkward to talk about. I've
mhm.
had other milestones I've hit where I've bought something tangible. Um, and I think a lot of therapists would judge me. So
Yeah. I think a lot. I think there's a couple of things that happen that I've noticed is that, first of all, a lot of therapists build their businesses from on top of trauma.
yeah,
They do. It's I see it all the time. But also, let's not forget about the systems around us that condition us to be of service, and really kind of put some really strict parameters
yeah,
on what we're allowed to charge or what we're allowed to do with that money. um, I went to social work school, right? So I can remember a professor in my graduate class telling me what I could probably make as a social worker. And it never occurred to me to even question my salary when I started
right,
getting jobs, right? Because I was so conditioned to like, this is
right,
what you can make.
yeah,
Um, and the system, it's a feature, not a bug of the systems, right? So it
yeah,
never occurred to me to even question that or to ask for more.
yeah,
And so it's, just to kind of give ourselves a break. There's a lot here that causes us
yeah,
for it to be challenging for us to charge more or to buy the
yeah.
microphone, or whatever that may be. So it's not just a one person thing. There's more to it here.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, people have heard it before. Some people that have been listening a while that's precisely why I'm here and have this business, which is that day one of graduate school, they sat us down and told us in so many words, if you think you can help people and make good money, you're in the wrong place.
Mhm,
So you should leave now. It's going to be a brutal career. And they brought in a bunch of really exhausted, case managers from the local agency. And they were like, this is your path. And it just pissed me off. It really
yeah.
struck me. And I thought, for something that has so much value and is literally, therapists are doing life-changing work and oftentimes saving people's lives and helping them
Mhm,
heal their trauma or leave a relationship or recover from childhood abuse or whatever. um, how can that not be valued? How can someone doing that work and giving their life to that work to
mhm,
their clients not also be wealthy? And that just really pissed me off and still does. And I see a lot of those messages still being recycled and internalized, and therapists that already have that internal working model, it's just confirmed of like, yeah, you're right. I should just be, tired all the time and burnt out and shouldn't ask for more. Um, in life. It's really it kind of fits, right? It's kind of like sometimes folks who have received abuse, they go back to abuse or another abusive partner or whatever it might be. Um, it's it's a bit predictable at
Hmm.
times, and then you go, why do you return to that? Well,
Yeah.
because the trauma is unhealed, right? Unresolved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think people are, I think people are not looking for trauma in their business. Like I say this all the time, like who's looking for it there? They're not. But it's so prevalent, and particularly I think in some industries, like, as therapists, a lot of our motivations for understanding it and becoming therapists come from a wounded place. And you can absolutely bring those wounds unhealed into your business. And I talk to clients, therapy clients, a lot who say, I after they've been through my program, do no harm. They're like, I wish my therapist would go through this program because I can see how they are abusing themselves with their business,
Mhm.
how they're, working crazy hours, meeting with too many people, having really poor
Yeah.
boundaries. And,
Yeah.
and they want more for their therapist, actually.
Right.
So, but
Right.
we do it because we've been taught to do it.
Totally. If you're here live on YouTube, there's a bunch of people watching right now. If you have questions, go ahead and ask them in the comment section. I'll pull them up one by one. We've got a little more than 10 minutes left for any questions that you all have for Nicole. But going back to our original kind of checklist, the four common signs
Hmm.
that unchecked trauma is running your business. What else are we missing from that list, or what else just kind of comes to mind? And again, the therapist listening right now wondering,
Hmm.
is unchecked trauma running my business? What else should we look out for?
Yeah. So in my program, we talk about something called the anatomy of a traumatized business, and this can be any business. Um, and there are four categories that came from some of the research that I was doing. And say it's unofficial research. It was just having conversations with, gosh, I don't know, like 300 plus entrepreneurs at this point, just talking about how trauma might be showing up and what the categories may be. And there are four that came kind of floated to the surface and have stayed pretty consistent. And so I like for people to know that, the first category is trust. So ways that a challenge around trust can show up in your business is that you don't trust other people, you don't delegate, right? Maybe you hire someone to do something and the next thing you know, you're taking it back from them, or you're just constantly delegating but not actually relying on anyone else, because relying on someone is the behavior of trust. So if you are really struggling with trust within your business and the dynamics within your business, that could be a sign that there's some unhealed, trust wounding in the relationship that you're building with your business. Or it could go the other extreme, in that you trust people too much and you're handing over you're kind of deferring your power and direction and leadership of your own business to other people because you have some narrative that they're smarter than I am or they can do this better than me. So trust is one of the ways that you can see that trauma might be showing up in your business, how that shows up for you. Um, Another one is boundaries. We talked about
Mhm.
boundaries already,
Yeah.
right? Are your boundaries are they too flexible? Are they leaky? Are you saying these are the only hours I'm going to work this week, and the next thing you know, you've added on, 5, 10. Um, the boundaries that you have with yourself about what type of work you're going to do. Scope creep can be a boundary, by saying yes to things within your practice you're not trained to do. So, what are the boundaries that you have with your relationship and your business? And the other one is money. We talked about that a little bit
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
That it can impact your revenue and your bottom line. Any
Yeah.
questions about any of those?
Yeah. Let's see if folks in the audience have questions. In the meantime, we have one here from Berg Counseling. He says, is there any trauma focused trainings you would recommend?
Regarding this
Yeah, I'm
type
not
of
sure.
topic?
Yeah, because if it's, kind of clinical trainings, that's not what we're talking about as much as, again, how trauma affects your business. I also know
Hmm.
that, Nicole, you have an online program for folks. You have a course for folks. So feel free to talk about that a little bit and
Yeah.
how it helps.
Honestly, when I first started recognizing, I'm like, oh my gosh, trauma is embedded in this business. That it's affecting the motivation, the relationship we build with it, and how we operate within the business. I went to Google and I started looking for this, and I couldn't find anyone talking about trauma and entrepreneurship. And I think that a lot of really amazing entrepreneurs are motivated by childhood trauma, because it really actually creates a lot of motivation and skill sets. High tolerance for discomfort, wanting to be the one in control. So I was looking at all of this and Googling and couldn't really find anyone talking about this. So I started, talking about this topic, and I'm seeing a few people catch up, but I don't really know of any other programs that are specifically that certify people in this or anything like that. My program is to help people become more trauma conscious as entrepreneurs or business owners. And we call it do no harm for a reason, because a lot of people do harm to themselves with their business and to the people that they actually work with, whether it's their employees or their clients.
Yeah.
They're creating harmful dynamics because they're not exploring how trauma may be embedded in their business in some way. So
Yeah.
I think that there's one other person. Maston Kip is doing some trauma informed certifications, but I don't really know that it's specifically geared towards the business dynamic like I have. So it's kind of an evolving field at this moment. And I don't certify people. My program is an awareness building, a processing program, but I don't certify people at the end of it to be trauma informed in any kind of way. At the end of it, you can go on my network and directory as a trauma conscious business owner, meaning that you've been through this program and that you're aware of how trauma may be impacting you and the people that you work with, but it's not a trauma certification program yet. I mean, there may be one in the future, but not yet.
Got another question here from Samantha Russell, and we've got time for maybe one more after this if folks want to ask more. She says, how can you determine whether you are being impacted by this phenomenon? How can you determine whether you're making decisions from a well-informed, healed place or from trauma? Again, this is generally what we've been talking about the whole time, but any other thoughts for her question in particular?
Yeah, I always say, is it working for you? Because if you're wanting to make more money and you're struggling with charging more, or buying the microphone, like there's something that you're wanting and you're struggling to get there. That's a way to kind of take a peek and say, could this have? How can I assess where the root of this may have come from? Is there any messaging around money? Is there any messaging around what I get to do and how I get to value myself? So I always like to tell people, what is not working for you in your business? Is it visibility? That's one of the other four, is like being visible. You need to be a little bit visible for your business. And if you're really struggling with giving talks, getting on podcasts, writing a book, a blog post, networking, whatever that may be a challenge that you can assess. Okay, so where has being visible been harmful to me or hurtful? So there are some ways that you can kind of take a look at to the origin story and assess where you're at. I also have a trauma and entrepreneurship assessment. If you go to the Nicole's links, I think we'll have it in the notes.
For sure.
There's a trauma and entrepreneurship assessment that you can take there. So that's also a good place to start.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll definitely have a link to that in the description, of course. Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, I think the visibility piece is interesting because a lot of therapists, they want to do more things, bigger things. Some of them want to go from being, an in-person therapist to being a coach or having a podcast or YouTube channel, whatever it is. And sometimes there is that hurdle of what it's like to be seen, be visible, to develop expertise in something, to put yourself out there, to put your ideas out there. And certainly, it's not always easy to do, to either get started and work past that initial hesitation, but also just to keep doing it, knowing that some people will really like you and some people won't. And I have the best of both, not the best of both worlds, but I have, both sides of things here in this business, of some people that are really nice and say nice things, and then people that are really mean. And we have to delete comments because some people are nasty, and you just have to deal with that and trust that it's worth it. And the mission of your work is worth it. And like you mentioned before, staying connected to your purpose, because if your purpose is bigger than that, then you'd be willing to kind of work through some of that discomfort along the way.
Mhm.
Um, as we kind of start to wrap up here, Nicole, what I guess if there's one thing that you hope therapists can take away or remember from this interview, what would it be? And then, of course, just a final kind of call to action for folks to get in touch with you and learn more about your programs.
I think we have to take an honest look at the origin story of our desire to be a therapist and desire to even start a practice, and to be honest with ourselves. There's nothing wrong with childhood trauma being an impetus for you wanting to do this work. There's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, it can be what makes you a fantastic therapist. It can be what makes you a fantastic entrepreneur. But when we are outside of our awareness around it and are not managing, what triggers tend to show up for us, where those 4 categories do I tend to get triggered? Because not everybody gets triggered in all 4 of those. Um, what that is for you. If you are not doing that, then you are defaulting into patterns that are holding you back in
Yeah.
your practice,
Yeah.
right? And you're putting other people first, and you are the most important person in your practice. End of story. You are the most important person, and if you don't feel like that, and you don't have the people, the support, and the systems around you to support you, because what works for you will work for you, then that's something to take a look at. Ask for some support. You can contact me, of course, or it's there. There's amazing people like you out there that can help. It doesn't have to stay this way. So give yourself a minute, deal with the shame spiral that we all deal with, right? And see what kind of support it is that you need. And I have to tell you that I work with business owners every day who wish that they had therapists that understood this, what we're talking about today, and understood the work that I do, so that they can go to therapists to work with trained professionals on their business issues. That they don't
Yeah.
have to compartmentalize their lives, that they can come in and they can talk about how trauma is in their business, and they
Yeah.
can have a therapist who's not afraid to talk to them about that.
Right. Right. Great stuff, and so much work to be done on all this. So I've certainly walked away with a lot today and things to think about. Um, yeah, thank you again so much, Nicole, for being here. I will go ahead and put a link to your website here in the
Yeah,
comments
thanks.
for people that are here live, and then again, people that are gonna be listening later. You can find it in the description, or if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, it'll be in the description as well. Yeah, again, thank you so much, Nicole, for doing this and for being here. It just so happens that next week, that's Thursday the 29th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, we're talking about trauma again with our guest, Jenny Hughes, who's going to come and talk about the impact of vicarious trauma on you and your practice. So
Mhm.
it's it's trauma month here at Private Practice Workshop. And yeah, really great to be talking about this stuff, and so much interest for sure.
Yeah.
Nicole, thank you again for being here, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Thanks.